And here we go. So we're going to be looking at a few things today. There's a lot of craziness going on. And we're going to start off with, a big lie that's been taught for a long time. And a lot of people are going to be surprised about this. But slavery was not about racism. Okay? Let me get this clear. Let me just make this perfectly clear. It was not about racism. It was about the African people enslaved the weaker African people. The Asian people enslaved the weaker Asian people. Genghis Khan. The Romans did it. Since the beginning of time, enslavement has happened. Now, what had happened is the slaves in the Atlantic trade slave, they would go to the beaches, and these tribes, because they wanted ammunition and weapons and goods and so forth, they were actually selling the slaves, and most of the slave purchasers didn't even know what they had gone through. Now, when they say that most of the slaves died on the way back, it actually was until medicine was discovered, which was by the fact after the trade, after slavery had ended, for America anyway, that the same amount of people that were dying were sailors as they were from just standard diseases from the slaves. From African Americans. And on top of that, if a European would have set land on African tribe land, their life expectancy because of malaria was less than was less than, well, let's see, it was about less than a year, something like that, a little bit less than a year. So that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. So, but you know what? Let's get into this. Hey, and don't forget, let's hit that subscribe button. If I can hit the button right. What's the button for subscribe button? Oh, I don't know. You know what? It's just going to have to just not be there. You know what? If you enjoy it, subscribe. But here we go. We're going to go into the back one. We're going to go into the first thing. All right? Here we go.
This week, President Trump repeated his false claim that he called out the Minnesota National Guard to crush Twin Cities riots.
Okay, well, that didn't work out at all for some reason. Let's interact with this one. There we go.
A whole lot of people, but either way, I'm here for it, so let's get it popping.
All
As
right.
for Black History Month, I'm not a fan. I'm with actor Morgan Freeman on this one.
Black History Month you find
Ridiculous.
why?
You're going to relegate my history to a month?
Oh, come on.
What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month? No,
Well-
come on, tell me.
Well, I'm Jewish.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh, why not?
Yeah.
Do you want one?
No.
No, I don't either. I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
Now, maybe Black History Month wouldn't be so bad if they actually taught Black history. Here are a few things that blacks are misled about: slavery, gun control, and the minimum wage. First, slavery.
This is going to be good.
Now, when I studied slavery in high school, I assumed, the way a lot of people do, that slavery was something that just happened to black people in Africa.
One of the sad things is that we talk in this country as if slavery was something unique to the United States or to blacks and whites. And in point of fact, slavery was one of the oldest institutions among human beings. They go back as far as there is recorded history. And in every single part of the world, Polynesians enslaved other Polynesians. For most of
See, now this is what I was talking about. This has gone on since the beginning of time.
history, people enslaved people who were the same race as themselves for the simple reason that they simply didn't have the resources to go to another continent and take people from another continent and move them en masse someplace else.
Now, slavery could not have happened without the complicity of African chieftains who sold Africans not just to European slavers, but to Muslim slavers as well.
But when white captains came offering manufactured goods, weapons, and rum for slaves, African kings and merchants had little reason to hesitate. They viewed the people they sold not as fellow.
Oh, and by the way, if African Americans are going to hate anybody, they're going to hate Muslims because they would castrate the males so they couldn't reproduce. That's why you don't see African Americans that are not mixed race in the Middle East. So you want to talk about evil? That's some evil shit right there.
Africans, but criminals, debtors, or prisoners of war from rival tribes. By selling them, kings enriched their own realms and strengthened them against neighboring enemies. African kingdoms prospered from the slave trade, but meeting the Europeans' massive demand created intense competition. Slavery replaced other criminal sentences, and capturing slaves became a motivation for war rather than its result. To defend themselves from slave raids, neighboring kingdoms needed European firearms, which they also bought with slaves.
Now, when they're talking about slavery was the main punishment. So now, this was more like a witch hunt. This was, let's find anything and everything we possibly can to take them and make them slaves. So okay, so this is pretty horrific already.
The slave trade had become an arms race, altering societies and economies across the continent.
Did you know that Muslim slavers took more blacks out of Africa than did European slavers? The Muslim slave trade began centuries earlier and continued long after the European slave trade ended.
Slavery, yes, during the 9th up to the 13th century, slavery was still very much an Islamic phenomenon as compared to the West. Of course, there was ancient slavery in many other societies, but in terms of chattel slavery, in terms of slavery as an institution, that was profitable. That was very much still an Arab Islamic preserve until the West came in sometime from the 15th, 16th century onwards.
Just how extensive was this Arab-Muslim slave trade of Africans?
But slavery was a very important part of Islamic expansion in West Africa, and in fact in Sudan, and from the very earliest period of Islamic penetration into Africa. It started by buying, purchasing slaves and trading in slaves, and then it went on from purchasing to raiding for slaves and capturing slaves deliberately, especially mainly black Africans, and transporting them into North Africa and into Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, and onwards to the Ottoman Empire to Turkey. So slavery was a very endemic part of Islamic interaction with Africa. And in West Africa, the jihad's period of the 18th and 19th century involved massive slave raiding and slave trading. And many of the slaves that were captured and sent and sold and taken into the transatlantic slave trade, most of those who were doing the raiding at the time were Muslim communities because they were the dominant tribes. So a lot of that happened. That is not to say that non-Muslim communities were involved in raiding, but the dominant tribes were the Muslim communities that were doing the raiding at the time.
Now, I've heard that Muslim slavers and Muslim slave owners treated slaves better than did European slavers and European and American slave owners. But is that true?
One of the themes I explored in my book is this perception that Muslims treated their slaves much more humanely than the Western slave trade. And what I found out in my own research was that that is not necessarily the case, and that there were very harsh treatments of slaves by Muslim groups. It was just a done deal at the time. And one of the key differences I looked at in my book that whereas slaves taken to the West were able to marry and reproduce and have their families, and you can still find large populations of African Americans today in North America and in the Caribbean. You go to the Islamic world and you find very few black remnants of the slave trade, which was very massive.
See, and that's one thing I had noticed. I've noticed that I've only seen mixed. And I assume that's because they castrated the males, but they impregnated the females.
One of the reasons is that many of the male black slaves taken into the Islamic world were castrated as eunuchs, which meant that they could not, of course, reproduce. And the other factor is that many of the women were taken as concubines by their slave masters, and they gave birth to mixed races, and they were very much absorbed into the society. So you don't have black slave kind of descendants in the Muslim world as you would in North America, and part of the reason is the castration and the way the slaves were treated.
Now, slavery ended in the West, in America not until after the Civil War. But what about the Arab Muslim slave trade? When did it end? In fact, has it ended?
Slavery persisted in Islamic countries far, far longer than it did in the West. The West abolished slavery long before the Islamic countries ever abolished slavery. And they did so under a lot of pressure from colonial governments and from Western governments and from all kinds of activist groups. And in fact, the Saudi Arabia, for instance, abolished slavery in 1961 or 1960 thereabout, whereas Mauritania abolished slavery in 1981. And these were done on paper, and a lot of it is still being done. In practice, there are still a lot of slaves in Muslim countries. And the Sudan, during the Civil War, there was a lot of slave raiding going on done by the Arab Muslims in the north against the enemies and the Christian Africans in the south. So even up to the 90s and this century, there was still capturing of young African men, boys in the Sudan for sale. So slavery continues, even though it has been abolished on paper in many Muslim countries.
Now gun control. Liberals.
Now, when I heard gun control, I really couldn't believe this was a ploy to to be a racist ploy. So we're going to see why. We're going to see why this is.
Especially those living in the inner city where crime is high, often demand further gun control legislation.
We fought a good fight earlier this year, but we came up short. And that means we've got to get back up and go back at it, because as long as there are those who fight to make it as easy as possible for dangerous people to get their hands on gun, then we've got to work as hard as possible for the sake of our children. We've got to be ones who are willing to do more work to make it harder.
Evil.
Well, I'm going to stop him right there, because they tend not to want to tell you this, but 90% of gun violence that is committed in America is held by illegal gun ownership. So stolen weapons, ghost guns, illegally serial numbers scratched off. This is all ATF stuff. So the ATF isn't doing their job. And on top of that, you have places like California where police officers were selling American weapons that they seized, and they're selling them to the cartel. So this is really troubling to me.
Are black students taught that the gun control movement began in this country as a means to make sure newly freed black slaves did not get their hands on guns? In the most infamous Supreme Court decision ever, Dred Scott, the Supreme Court Justice Roger Taney said, if blacks are anything other than chattel property, why, they may be able to get their hands on guns.
It was a horrible, racist Southern Democrat judge named Roger Taney, and he determined that Dred Scott could not count for more than 3/5 of a person. Why? Because Dred Scott couldn't have a firearm. In fact, Judge Taney later noted, and this is in a chapter in my first book, Hands Off My Gun, that in order for him to give Dred Scott full citizenship and count him as an actual law-abiding American, that meant that Dred Scott would have the, quote, full liberty to have and to bear arms. And Judge Taney couldn't have that.
That's terrible.
Next. Democrats love them some minimum wage, don't they?
Tom Steyer wants a higher minimum wage. The billionaire says that he would propose paying workers at least $22 an hour if he wins the White House. Steyer floated the idea yesterday during a campaign stop in South Carolina.
Now, during Black History Month.
Okay, if you raise the minimum wage to $22 an hour, all that's going to happen is you're going to have more people unemployed because companies are going to want to keep their stockholders. The stockholders are going to want to keep them accountable to be showing quarterly profits, and they need to keep on growing. Growth is the number one thing that needs to happen. So they're just going to hire less people, and that's just going to put the rich and the poor poverty gap even more. It's going to become greater. So I don't understand what that guy's thinking.
Month, are black students taught that the minimum wage movement in this country began as a means to make sure that blacks who are willing to work for less did not take jobs away from whites who are unwilling to work for less? By the 1960s, many African Americans were employed as farmers. This changed in 1967 when the government extended the minimum wage laws to American farmers as part of the war on poverty. Black farmers who were accustomed to making a modest $3.50 per day were now legally required to be paid $1 per hour, a tremendous increase in wages. The effect of this law was immediate and undeniable. An estimated 25,000 farm workers were put out of work in the Mississippi Delta alone. Black farmers were not oblivious to the cause and effect. That dollar an hour ain't worth nothing, said the wife of one day laborer. It would have been better if it had been 50 cents a day if you work every day. 50 cents per day, of course, was a lower wage than what her husband would have been earning prior to the law. Her point was clear. The federal minimum wage law destroyed their ability to earn a living. End of quote.
The first minimum wage law in our country was the Davis-Bacon Act of 1931. And the Davis-Bacon Act says that all workers in federally funded or federally assisted construction projects must be paid the prevailing wage. And if you look on page 6513 of the Congressional Record on March 31st, 1931, you'll see congressional testimony where congressmen will say, see that contractor over there? He brings cheap colored labor up from the South, puts them in cabins, and it's labor of that sort that has to compete, that white Americans are competing against.
One of the things that my friends on the left think is just grand is the minimum wage. And 100 years ago, the minimum wage came into being in the United States, state by state, and its declared purpose was to...
The new best way to make money online that no...
Okay, so we can kind of see what that was. That was the left being completely just brainwashed. I don't know what you call it. They live in La La Land. They're living in La La Land. A lot of them are. Okay, so now we got to look at the violence. Okay, here's the other thing. Here's the violence. Since the Democrats, these are Democratic cities, and this is what's happening in them. Okay, now this is pretty. Yeah, it's not cool. Let's put it that way. It's not cool at all. So let's take a look at this, and we will you'll just see what I'm talking about.
What we're seeing is a very specific, dramatic increase in murder and gun violence. There was about a 30% increase nationally in murder from...
Sorry about that.
The president also put Minneapolis on...
This week, President Trump repeated his false claim that he called out the Minnesota National Guard to crush Twin Cities riots.
The president also put Minneapolis on the list of most violent cities in America, all run by Democrats. Is that true? Here's Pat Kessler's reality check.
America's biggest cities saw violent protests this summer, including Minneapolis. President Trump repeatedly linking violence to cities run by Democrats.
And you hear about certain places like Chicago, and you hear about what's going on in Detroit and other cities, all Democrat run. Every one of them's Democrat run. 20 out of 20, 20 worst, the 20 most dangerous are Democrat run.
The president is technically accurate about the mayors
and he's not
in big
wrong.
cities with violent
I live
crime.
outside of
17
Chicago,
the 20 are
and
Two
it
are
is a
independent.
disaster.
One is Republican, but there's no evidence political party is related to crime.
There are three separate issues here. Big city.
Let me tell you about the Chicago crime. There was violence that broke out where they shot off 70 shots. Multiple people were shot, 2 killed, and the police weren't going to arrest anybody. And the reason why they weren't going to arrest anybody is because nobody else got hurt, such as a bullet going through a window and killing a child, something along those. They classified it as mutual combat. Now, are we living in a war zone? Where are we living right now? This is insanity. It's insanity. You know, they want Second Amendment, to go away. It's not the guns that are the problem. They want the NRA. They're evil. The NRA teaches people how to defend themselves and defend other people. If anything, we need more guns in more areas with more trained people, and we need psychological testing. The government should have been working on mental health since the 1950s, and they should have been working on it, and they're working on it hard. Instead of spending trillions of dollars on things that we don't need, we should have been working on mental health, because the more technology advances, the more we get that dopamine rush from those likes, from those views, from those thumbs up, thumb down, constant bullying that happens. Not only what it used to be would be at school, but now it happens at home. So we need to get a reality check here.
Crime, political leadership, and civil unrest. So let's unpack it all.
By a 31-point margin, Democratic voters tend to live in larger urban areas, including young people and voters of color. Republicans tend to settle in smaller, more white, more rural communities. But violent crime is actually going down in cities, according to the FBI, and Minneapolis is not among the top 20. Studies do show a surge in violence in the week after George Floyd died in Minneapolis. Homicides, aggravated assaults, commercial burglaries. But after that...
What about New York? What about the crime in New York? They're not even arresting people for certain activities. People are getting pushed in front of subway trains, and they're not getting arrested for it. So what are they talking about? Portland, an entire city was taken over. California, there's no-go areas in California. Like when you go into Mexico, it says stay out of this area, it's dangerous, you're going to get kidnapped, you're going to get killed. There is now no-go areas in California, in the Southern California. Not only that, there are people in Texas that are defending their land and have their houses broken into by illegal immigrants that are crossing the border by the hundreds of thousands. So what are we doing? This is a mess.
Week, crime abruptly dropped across the country.
Our estimated wait time is currently 5 days.
The president appears to be sending a message to white voters in suburbs, but the FBI says linking crime rates and political parties is misleading, flawed, and incomplete.
It is definitely not misleading. The policies that were put in place and them wanting to abolish police. Okay, if you abolish the police, the criminals win. You need to have police. Okay? If anything, you probably should be hiring all Marines. and Army and people like that. Those are the people you should, but they have to go through vigorous psychological testing, make sure no PTSD, that kind of stuff. But those are the people you should be hiring for these jobs, not these bullies that came out of high school that are now realize that the greatest time of their life was being a bully in high school. That was the greatest time of their life. Now the rest of their life sucks. So what do? They become a cop so they can have power hungry. It's just a power trip. That's all it is.
Should never be done. There's no evidence that big city crime is because of Democrats. That's Reality Check.
While the recent national crime spike leveled off, shootings in Minneapolis are up about 250% compared to last summer. Year to year, killings are also up in both Minneapolis and St. Paul.
A deadly explosion rocked the R.M. Palmer chocolate factory in West Reading, Pennsylvania.
I've got total destruction. It looks like Palmer candies.
The emergency responder.
Okay, guys, we're going to take just a real quick break. It's only going to be a very, very, very short break, all right? So, the break is going to be, hold on. Okay, welcome back. And we are going to be, well, we're going to be going into something else. The gun violence. Here's something that, what is this here? I have no idea what that is. You know what? We're going to find out what this is. You know why? Because I don't know. Oh, why murder rates are rising in the U.S.
2020. Year on year, it was by far the largest increase ever recorded. We've dated going back to the 1960s in terms of national murder trends. The largest previous increase was 12.5% year on year. So a 30% increase was really dramatic.
Gun violence has been consistent
So that one doesn't want to play. So, okay. So let's just go to Backfire. We're going to watch this one here. Let's see what's going on.
All right, this morning an update on a story we've been following about a professor forced to cancel his speech at MIT over his push to evaluate students based on merit and not racial equity. That push to cancel him backfiring as thousands register to attend his
this is great. This is absolutely fantastic. Finally, people with smarts.
This speech. He joins us now. Audrey, why was it important for you to be a part of this comeback story for this professor?
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm so excited to attend Professor Abbott's speech next week. I've known Professor Abbott for about a year now. He's a geophysicist and professor at the University of Chicago, where I'm currently a senior. And at the University of Chicago, I co-founded the Chicago Thinker, which is a student-run newspaper where I'm the editor-in-chief, and we're dedicated to challenging the mob's crusade against free speech. And I have to say that Professor Abbott stands out as one of the few faculty members willing right now to put his name and career on the line in order to defend free speech. And he's always said that he's not a particularly political person. He's never thought of himself as a political person, but he's extraordinarily brave, and he's really leading the charge right now against the cancel mob.
Right.
So I'm so grateful for his efforts.
Which is great. University of Chicago and Princeton usually not pushing back against the cancel mob. They're usually joining in it. Not this time. So here's an excerpt from the Newsweek editorial that he put out. The words diversity, equity, and inclusion are often supported by well-intentioned people, but their effects are the opposite of noble sentiments. It requires being willing to tell an applicant, I will ignore your merits and qualifications and deny you admission because you belong to the wrong group. We propose an alternative framework called merit, fairness, and equality, whereby the university applicants are treated as individuals and evaluated through a rigorous and unbiased process based on their merit and qualifications alone. I am heartened by this story.
I find this unbelievable, just absolutely unbelievable, that it took this long for universities to realize this is insanity. This is crazy. Okay. Let me put it this way. I have bipolar disorder, and sometimes it takes one to know one. And what the Democrats are doing is they're creating mental illness. There was a study done from an investment firm, and this investment firm basically was looking and trying to figure out to tell their clientele in 2030 what to invest in. And what they found out by the end was quite appalling. I believe the number was 53% of women 24 to 44 will be single and will never have children. So, Democrats, you're playing with literally humanity being canceled out, and they don't seem to get this. Electric cars can't do that because the simple fact is it takes more greenhouse gases to create, say, solar panels. It kills more birds with having windmills. It creates a lot of carbon to build the windmills. Those are just a few things, and then there's only one thing you can do to save this, which is make cheap energy and accessible water and food for everybody. That's the only way you're going to solve these problems, and these people are just stupid. This utopia of the Democratic Party is going to destroy this country.
In a way, but also surprised, Audrey. This is an anomaly, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, but I hope that Professor Abbott's cancellation is one of the last, if not the last. Maybe that's a naive hope, but I'm so heartened by the amazing support he's gotten from all across the country. He has countless supporters here at the University of Chicago and beyond, and I really hope that we Americans can keep showing the woke mob that they're not going to win, that we're going to stand by one another, and we're not going to let intelligent, well-intentioned voices be canceled.
Yeah, people should be rewarded for their success by their hard work. That's called merit. I earned it. You don't want something there. You don't want to get something handed to you for any other reason. Audrey, thanks so much. Congratulations on taking such action at such a young age. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You got it. And I look forward to hearing your review of his lecture on Zoom.
Okay, so yeah, that was kind of a big thing there. We're going to move on to something else that this goes along with this. What's actually happening is this is very important.
If you knew a heart attack was coming, Joe Barton here, and if you're over 40, check your chest.
What is going on here?
2 heart attack early.
Okay, that wanted to play for some reason. Don't worry about it. Not a big deal. But when they said in their studies that women 24 to 44 are going to be single, I'm going to show you exact examples why in this video here. I love this whatever.com. It's a great show. A lot of these are OnlyFans, but when you watch and you listen, and they don't seem to grasp really reality.
Warning signs that I'm going to show you right now.
I'm not really sure. It's really hard.
I'm a huge monogamist at heart. I want undying commitment from the person that I am dating and that I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. I give that to them and I expect that in return. And I think our society's playing with that boundary is ultimately leading to a complete breakdown of healthy relationships. It's why you're seeing the vast majority of Gen Z unhappy in their relationships. It's why we have the lowest marriage rate since America began recording marriage rates in the 1860s, and we have the highest divorce rate as well. So
no, you're wrong about that. The reason why that's happening is because women are trying to be completely independent. They don't seem to realize that they have the most important job. Men protect and provide, but women have the most important job in the world for humanity, for biology. They give birth to our species, and they seem to think that that's not important enough, and I don't understand why. So let's continue, I guess.
We're unhappy when we're dating. We're not getting married. If we do get married, we end up getting divorced. And as a result, Pew Research has found that our generation is just taking ourselves off the market entirely.
Yes, you are taking, exactly. They agree with what they were saying before. They're taking themselves off the market. And you know what? Men are starting to not even go after the women because of the way these women, you're going to start seeing the way they think. They seem to think that what they bring to the table is, well, I just bring me. And the man's supposed to bring 6 figures and a whole bunch of other stuff. But it ends in divorce because women always seem to think that they're 10s. So you'll ask a woman where she's very obviously a 5 or a 6 or a 7. If you ask me, I'm a 3. Okay? I'm truthful. I'm realistic. I'm a 3. If you ask every one of these women, they're going to say they're a 9 or a 10. Let's see.
We decided it's not even worth it. So
I
think that's a huge component.
Are you talking about that recently released data from Pew? I mean, there's a whole bunch of data points, but the big one that I took from it was I think it was comparing men and women between the ages of 18 to 29, and they found that women between the ages of 18 to 29 were twice as likely to be in relationships than men in that same age group.
But interesting study. So the first one that I referenced, the majority of Gen Zers, if you are in a relationship, you are unhappy. I think the figure from Pew, if I'm remembering correctly, and obviously I don't have it right in front of me, was about 73% of us who are dating are unhappy, really unhappy in our relationships. Those of us who aren't dating are intentionally not putting ourselves on the dating.
It's because you believe that you deserve better than what you believe. You make $35,000 a year, but you believe the man should make $100,000 a year.
Market for either casual or committed relationships. But the study that you're referencing was fascinating. That came out a few weeks ago, that women our age are more likely to be in relationships than men, which makes you think, who is everybody dating at the end of the day? If the women aren't dating the men, then how did that statistic end up coming to fruition?
What crosses my mind is I think there's perhaps two explanations. One, women in that age group are dating older men, 30 to 40. But I think the bigger thing is that women are maybe think they're in a relationships or are in a relationship, and they're sharing higher quality guys. So, and there's this concept called hypergamy. Women are all chasing after the top tier of men. So a lot of women are happier sharing a top tier guy than settling for a guy that's actually on their level.
So,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree with you.
That's exactly what I was just saying.
I think I made like a TikTok the other day that was like, get yourself an average man, ladies, or something like that. Because like, the majority of your audience, I would say, is average males, right? We're like,
there's some Chads.
Well,
there's
yeah,
some Chads
but
for sure.
But it's very it's like what, less than 5% of men are making like $100,000 a year in America or something like that. Like it's really low. So
most people are average.
Yeah, just average. Like, so I think we need to normalize the fact that like, if you get in a relationship, he doesn't have to be making the same or more money than you, right? Because that's true equality. And like equity or whatever, however you want to phrase it, it's about what you give to the relationship. And so whether that means that you're a stay-at-home mom and he's out there working full-time or vice versa, it's about like everybody doing their part, whether you're man or woman, whatever role you want to play. So.
Yeah, but here's the problem is that you basically, what you have going on in the dating marketplace is average women don't want average guys.
I'm encouraging them to. That's what my podcast is about.
Call me crazy. Why wouldn't average women just decide to stop being average ourselves and raise the standards for what we expect from the men that we're dating?
Sorry, explain that one more
time. Rather than settling for an average guy, why wouldn't we just demand more from the men that we're dating?
Because it's very hard for some people to take.
Men respond extremely well to boundaries. They do psychologically. If you set a boundary for a man, either intentionally or unintentionally, he will honor that boundary. For example, if you let him continue getting away with cheating on you and being half in, half out of a relationship, being a situationship for months upon months upon months without ever committing to you or wanting to put a label on things, that's a boundary that you've set, saying it's acceptable for me to be treated that way. Why wouldn't we as women, actual feminism, I suppose, to be theoretical about this, demand more from the men that we're spending our lives with?
I agree.
Yeah, but what doesn't make any sense about that is you're expecting more out of them, but yet why is it that we can't have standards to expect also more out of them, or at least average? Why should we have to settle and you shouldn't?
And I think like here's where the problem lies, right? Men end up leaving because if that girl that's demanding respect and demanding boundaries, now she becomes high maintenance to them. This is, again, I'm speaking anecdotally, but I've heard this from men before. Now she becomes high maintenance, so they're leaving and they're going to find somebody that just says yes all the time.
So what if we all did it? I hear all the time, all men want are sex. All men want is sex. All men want is sexual partners. What if we as women just said, we're not okay with that anymore. We want more.
I'm going to tell you flat out, not all men just want sex. Okay, that's a part of it. That's the beginning of it. That's the floozies. That's the ones that just throw them at it. Like when Trump said that he could just grab them by the you know what? The women that he's talking about are the women that will just go for the rich man, and they will spread their legs for a rich man just to do it. Those are the women that he was talking about. Now, this is different. This isn't the same thing. Yes, it's sex, but here's the thing. A man actually wants a woman to when he's having a bad day, wants her to be with her and get comfort. And when she's having a bad day, wants the same thing, wants their finances, wants marriage tax write-offs, wants to have a family with 2 parents, and have their kids grow up to be rich so they can take care of them. I mean, these are all things that people want. And to say that, you don't need a man, or you don't need this, you don't need that, that's just bullshit. It's just complete bullshit.
Wouldn't that force men to rise to that occasion? And similarly, men who might be listening to this, you should be going after women who expect those boundaries, because a rising tide lifts all ships, and that's going to improve.
Well, the genie's out of the bottle. I mean, I think we can say in an ideal world, wouldn't it be fantastic if we did away with hookup culture? And I think that is desirable, but I don't think, I think the culture war has honestly been lost to decadence and degeneracy. So
there's no hope.
I mean,
We've lost.
I think the culture war has been lost because you have.
Well, since birth control, that was the biggest thing. 1960 birth control, that was the biggest loss.
Academia, you have journalism, you have the mainstream media, which is all basically very, and without really going so much into politics, it's very left-leaning. Mm-hmm. Every single university in the country has a feminist studies, a gender studies, a women's studies program. I mean, now this is getting into men's rights. There's no equivalent men's studies or men's rights things in education. We're 2 blocks away from UC.
Also, keep in mind that they've actually done a study, and they have proven that testosterone in men is actually dropping, and they don't know why. So I think society and environmental has a lot to do with this. The universities are probably causing a lot of this too.
CSB, University of California, Santa Barbara. It's frequently ranked the #1 party school in the U.S. Major hookup culture here. And I would say across most universities and colleges, there is a major hookup culture. And then beyond college, there's a major hookup culture where it's just casual sex, situationships, all this stuff. I really think it's going to be a challenge to walk that back. I don't see
how about instead of walking it back, we as a generation and as a society acknowledge we are at the end of our rope, that we've never struggled more as a society from a cultural perspective than we are right now. Despite living in arguably the most progressive and advanced society ever, we're miserable. So much so that 1/3 of us as women in our teenage years, and a significantly higher portion of men in their young adult years, say we don't even want to be here at all. So maybe rather than walking back, we choose a new path forward.
Well, but so, and you consider yourself pretty conservative, right?
Yeah,
so,
secret's out. I'm extremely conservative.
Yeah.
Shocker.
One thing that occurred to me is, social media and dating apps, I think that these are majorly at the forefront of hookup culture, all this stuff. So government intervention, how do you unwind the damage that social media and dating apps has done?
Well, that's the problem. You can't unwind, in my opinion. And this is...
No, the damage is already done. Hookup culture's, it's there, and it's going to stay.
The really hard reality of where we go from.
But pro-life. This abortion thing, I would say if it's 4 weeks or before, abortion okay. After 4 weeks, it's not okay.
Here, I work a lot with generations older than us, and I cannot tell you how often every day I hear Gen Z is beyond all hope, Gen Z is destroying America, your generation will be the end of us, when in reality somebody else built this world that we have grown up in and have really struggled to come into adulthood in, and now has been dropped in our laps, and we have no idea what to do with it moving forward. technology is a quintessential experience of what our day-to-day life is like, what reality is like. It involves our school, our jobs, our dating relationships, our sex is happening online. Let's just be totally honest. We've had a really long conversation about that on this podcast. I don't know that you can walk it back. I think we as a society would have to come to a cultural conversation point and change minds and culture from the inside out, rather than regulatory measures to do that, by saying, this is not working. We need to do more. I sound crazy that I'm like one of the only.
Indoctrinating children on the Democratic side is a one major big fault.
People in my own life that has never downloaded a dating app, nor have I ever wanted to. I've never had a desire to. I don't seek out opportunities to watch adult content. I don't surround myself with opportunities to do that because I've set a different standard for my life and encourage the other people in my life to do that as well. Imagine if we all banded together, regardless of politics, where everybody is seeking to divide us on this issue, and start today by saying, this is not working. Generation Z is falling apart at the seams, and clearly our dating life is a great place to start that needs more help than almost any other aspect of our culture. What can we do differently, returning to traditional values, but in a new way that would take us to a stronger future?
I don't think it can be undone, honestly. I think it's just going to be the status quo. I mean, you have basically the destruction of the nuclear family. That's gone. You have feminism.
It's not gone yet.
Well,
people are attempting to.
It's not gone, but I mean, isn't it the majority of people are being raised in single mother households?
People say it's acceptable. The majority of Americans say it's acceptable for people.
Well, that and the study of single mother households, I mean, you're like 75% or something like that more likely to drop out of high school, like, you know, more percentage like to go or get arrested, like all that kind of stuff. Like single mother households are like not good for kids. They're just not. I understand there's circumstances where some men leave and there's nothing you can do about it, but that's the thing, like that's why I'm divided on that issue, because if we make this general statement like, you know, keep the nuclear family together, but if he leaves, how is it her fault, you know? And then you could say like, well, she picked a bad guy, but
right. Well, there are ideal and unideal circumstances,
right,
for sure. But I guess just more generally, not pigeonholing ourselves in the single parent household conversation, I'm curious what all of you would say. Do you think that our generation is happy? Do you think that we're thriving? Do you think that this progressive society that we've spent so many decades trying to build a utopia to live in is working?
I'm going to tell you right now, it is not. It is not working. It is creating a large amount of mental health. This is coming from somebody with mental health condition, and it takes one to know one. It is not helping. This is very bad, and it's getting worse. In 10 to 15 to 20 years, you're going to be seeing transgender people committing suicide. You're going to be seeing regret. You're going to be seeing small percentages of them that are truly transgender, and which is perfectly fine, and be gay, be lesbian, whatever you want to be, but identifying as a wolf, identifying as Hitler, which yes, I saw that, this type of craziness utopia, it's not working. I can't even, since I'm disabled, I can barely even go to the store and shop. I used to spend $55 a week on food. I can't get away with spending $120 a week on food. And a lot of it, I'm eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches a lot. So don't tell me that this utopia is working.
I don't think any like previous generations were either happy. I wouldn't say happy either. Like obviously Gen Z's like hookup culture, blah, blah, blah. They're so blindsided by that, but it's because it's just like occupying them. Like living in a college town, living here in Isla Vista, I go out, I see people have meaningless hookups, all this stuff. But to them, it just like, that's what college to them is about. And that is kind of like ingrained into their minds from previous generations of people too.
Drink this 30 minutes before bed with water to get rid of ear ringing, buzzing, clicking, and pulsing for good.
Okay, guys, we're going to move into the next one here. This is the Democratic City violence, okay? So we're going to see this firsthand.
deadly explosion rocked the R.M. Palmer chocolate factory in West Reading, Pennsylvania.
I've got total destruction. It looks like Palmer candies.
The emergency responders, including the fire department and law enforcement, immediately responded to the scene to secure the area and provide assistance to those affected.
I have one trapped under the rubble.
The factory destroyed. Another building nearby severely damaged.
It's pretty leveled. Unfortunately, there's not too much to be able to kind of salvage from it. The building in the front with the church and the apartments, the explosion was so big that it moved that building 4 feet forward.
It was the loudest thing I've ever heard in my life, and it literally felt like the ground fell out from underneath you.
The whole house was shaking. The lights were kind of flickering. I was really freaked out. I was thinking earthquake potentially.
All right, so yeah, that's some pretty scary stuff there.
Breaking news tonight, rising tensions in the skies. The U.S. accusing Russia of downing one of its drones near Ukraine. A Russian fighter jet allegedly striking the unmanned U.S. drone in international airspace over the Black Sea. The U.S. military calling it reckless. What the Kremlin is saying, and how will the U.S. respond?
Yeah, World War III
Also,
is coming up.
States of emergency is
World War III is coming up, guys. We're going to just take a look at this gun violence here.
What we're seeing is a very specific, dramatic increase in murder and gun violence. There was about a 30% increase nationally in murder from 2019 to 2020.
Wow.
Year on year, it was by far
that's
the
a
largest
lot.
increase ever recorded. We've dated going back to the 1960s in terms of national murder trends. The largest previous increase was 12.5% year on year. So a 30% increase was really dramatic.
Gun violence has been consistent as an American as an apple pie.
Unfortunately, the rise in violence has occurred just about everywhere in the United States without much difference regionally.
But the rise in gun violence impacts the population unequally.
The risk of homicide is much, much, much higher if you're Black than if you are any other race or ethnicity.
In the United States, Black people are over 12 times more likely to be a victim of gun homicide than white people.
Everything is pretty much set up and designed for some African American youth to fail.
It feels like it's an attack on Black men. You know what I mean? It feels like, to be honest, like the world hates me. When I was 15, I knew I was going to die at 18 and I accepted it.
Trauma is ubiquitous in this area. The victims of violence are traumatized. The perpetrators are traumatized. The law enforcement and other officials who are working with these populations are traumatized. So having a trauma-informed approach to these issues is really important.
Here's why murder rates are rising in the U.S. and what we can do about it. If you were to look at the overall crime data since the start of the pandemic, it doesn't look like there's much of a problem.
When we talk about crime going up or down, for the most part, in most places, crime is falling because people aren't out and about. You can't shoplift if stores have been closed in 2020 and 2021.
But when you separate out the data on murder, it becomes clearer that something has changed in the past few years.
A lot of these sort of crimes of randomness, crimes of mobility, which makes up that big capital C crime number, those are down thanks to the pandemic.
There are 4 major categories when talking about
guys.
violent crime. Homicide, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. Violent crime as a category rose about 5% between 2019 and 2020. Homicide, which is more colloquially referred to as murder, rose nearly 30%.
30%.
It's gun violence and murder,
That is
which
insane.
make up this tiny slice of overall major crime that is really what we're seeing, this sort of sustained increase.
Nearly 80% of murders in 2020 were committed with a firearm.
The rest of crime, which is generally more dependent on mobility, dependent on more random criminal acts, those haven't really increased.
It's very hard to know with certainty what drives crime trends, but I think there's broad agreement that there are at least 3 factors that are playing an important role. The first, of course, is the pandemic itself, which placed the individuals who are at the highest risk of violence under enormous pressure, and they were already under pressure to begin with. And at the same time, it put the institutions that are responsible for engaging those individuals, law enforcement, courts, and community-based workers, all under tremendous strain as well.
Investments in civic infrastructure reduce violent crime. For example, providing structured opportunities for kids and for adolescents, whether that's after-school programs or it's summer jobs programs, it's lengthening the school day. All of these interventions reduce the risk of violent crime because we're giving teenagers and adolescents someplace to go that's structured.
Make Michael's your one-hop Easter stop with 50% off Easter decor, baking and party supplies, and Easter baskets too. Plus, think outside the basket with mix and match deals on
Hello, friend in Minneapolis.
You remembered her favorite binky, right?
I forgot the.
Sorry about that, guys. Sorry about that.
Kia, movement that inspires.
There was a significant surge in violent crime immediately after the murder of George Floyd.
As people lose trust in the criminal justice system after sort of these widespread, instances of police shootings, they're less likely to participate in it plausibly, which leads to these very difficult to interrupt cycles of violence.
Highly publicized incidents of police violence really drive a significant wedge between police and the communities that they're supposed to serve. When they are disconnected,
yeah, police are beginning out of hand.
The George Floyd shooting to black people was the last straw. You see this black man suffering, with a knee in his neck, begging, "I cannot breathe, sir." You will be angry because at the end of the day, George Floyd looked like one of my uncles. When that happened, we just felt like, so y'all really just gonna kill us.
There was a time when people were scared to commit a crime in front of the police. Right now, a lot of people just can care less.
The cops are scared. When brothers that's committing these crimes are noticing that the cops are scared, why do you think the crime rates are so high? We already angry. You're not gonna protect us. But what are we gonna do?
Tio Hardiman is the executive director of the nonprofit organization Violence Interrupters, which helps facilitate gang mediation and works with high-risk young men and gang members.
Violence Interrupters is what you might say is a public health approach to reducing shootings and homicides here in Chicago and across the nation. We look at violence as an epidemic. It's learned behavior, and we have to train people and educate them on how to unlearn violent behavior.
I got shot in my head because of choices that I made in my past. Around that time, I had just stopped gang banging, just stopped selling drugs,
We needed a man like that last man that works with the youth and tells them the gatekeepers. These are people called gatekeepers. And what happens is somebody says, "Hey, look, I came from this, and look where I'm at now. I got money, I got a house, I got this. I'm out of the hood. I'm out of this. I'm out of that." And then they go back to their own communities, and then they have these other people, these adults, telling them, "Oh, that ain't true." But those are called the gatekeepers, and they knock them down. So it's just a revolving door. We need to stop this. It's got to be stopped.
Carrying guns, I had just stopped. I remember at that time, I was trying to stop drinking. And I remember that night I slipped up. I went to the party, I got drunk. I remember telling myself right before I got shot, I have tomorrow. Ma'am, they shot the cop 28 times. They hit me and my friend in our heads. I was bleeding out of my head like a faucet, but I survived. I've been doing different things to heal from that, giving back and trying to talk to people who's going through what I've gone through has helped a lot.
The third factor playing a significant role is guns, specifically firearms. And what we know is that there was a massive surge in legal purchases of guns during the pandemic.
There were an estimated 21 million guns sold in the U.S. in 2020, breaking the previous record in 2016 of just over 16 million sold. In 2021, that number dropped slightly to a little less than 19 million guns sold.
What we also know is that a larger share of those legally purchased guns were diverted into the hands of criminals more quickly than normal. Criminologists call this the time to crime, and the time to crime for most weapons, meaning the time a legally purchased gun eventually finds its way to a crime scene, is often 2, 3, 4 years. Unfortunately, the number of guns that found their way to a crime scene, newly purchased guns, within 6 months surged massively during the pandemic.
We know for a fact that poverty
So we do need stricter gun laws. We need more background checks. I think we need a social, not a social credit system, but a social background check on social medias, all social medias, and there needs to be a real good background check in social medias, things like that, of any type of violence.
We know for a fact that discrimination has played a very significant role in an adverse way when it comes down to poor communities, especially Black and brown communities, but in particular, the African-American community.
When we think about what drives a particular individual to commit a particular crime at a particular time, we tend to think about motive and opportunity and probability of getting caught. So motive oftentimes comes down to an economic motive, engaging in an illegal activity to get some kind of asset versus legal activity.
When you are born into poverty, or when you are faced with poverty, and it's like you see you cannot get the resources that you need, you give up and you start doing other things. We need help. We need resources. We need mental health services. We need jobs. We need help.
That guy is exactly right. Exactly the same thing I've been saying. And I want to get involved. I want to get involved somehow, and I want to be able to bring something to maybe urban neighborhoods, something that can show them that, hey, I'll help you put in the work, but you got to want to do it for yourself, and we'll get you out of here. You know, it's so important that we have this that's going on. You know, this is, and here's, I don't think I can show the whole picture. I can't, but it basically shows that the left side is tyranny and the right side is liberty. And that's what it is right now. That is exactly what it is right now. So maybe I can show this. No, I guess I can. I can't show the whole thing. Oh, I guess I can. Okay, so this is the left. Tyranny, socialist, liberal, fascism, communism. Those are all things. This is a political spectrum. Everything's got to be on a spectrum nowadays. This is the political spectrum. Okay, so when you look at this, this is what's really going on. The left is brainwashing you. It is a brainwash. You need to start paying attention. But you know what? We're done with this for today. This is crazy. Let's just go ahead and we're going to be ending the stream.